You are listening to Insights from the Conference Board.
Hi, welcome to Insights. I'm Amy Abel, Vice President of Human Capital at the Conference Board. Today we have a great conversation discussing working parents working with kids. I'm sure many of you know that this is a big topic. This fall, working parents with school-age kids will be facing some really tough challenges as they try to balance working from home, partially homeschooling their kids, and just facilitating their family life. Many schools will either be going exclusively remote or a combination of online, socially distanced in-person classes where students are only in the classroom a few days a week. They basically vary in all the examples that we have been hearing. And things may change suddenly if COVID-19 cases spike or if someone at the school tests positive. How can employers help their employees navigate these unpredictable times and frankly, potentially, crazy work schedules? What can organizations do and think about? So joining me today in this conversation is Gad Levanon, head of our Labor Markets Institute. Gad is an expert on U.S. labor markets and of forecasting the U.S. economy, as well as a parent of 3 school-aged children. I'm also joined by Elizabeth Crofoot, senior economist at the Conference Board, focused on U.S. and global labor markets. She is also the parent of 2 young children. So Gad and Elizabeth, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Amy. And we're really going to start discussing now how companies can react to this problem that parents are facing. They're working from home. They're also trying to help their kids go through their own remote learning challenges. Gad, how big is this issue and how many families are we talking about that are being affected by remote learning?
It's a very big issue, and maybe it's good to break it down to the 2 age group or education or organization groups. One are children, young children who are in daycare or childcare or nannies, and others are children who are already in schools. And just to give you a sense of the size of the population we're talking about, it's about 22.5 million children under the age of 6 are in the US, and almost that many who are between the ages of 6 and 12. And those children, the number of working parents that are impacted by this to some degree is between 20 to 25 million working parents, which is well above 10% of all the workforce. Now, those that are impacted at the childcare level, we know that in June, for example, that's the latest data we have, spending on childcare in the US was still 57% below the February level. So that means much less spending on childcare facilities or on nannies, either because parents are afraid to send their children there or to have a nanny come in, or because a lot of those organizations were closed, either because the teachers were afraid to be around children, or because business was too weak, so they decided to close down. So a lot of need in that age group. And in school, it's going. We still don't know how many will open, but it seems like in many school districts in the US, they are going to start under the assumption or start as remote only. The ones that are going to start with some in-person, in many cases, it's 1 or 2 days a week. So for a full-time worker, this doesn't, they still need solution for the other days in many cases. So we are talking about a very large number of the workforce that is being impacted by that. And the Bipartisan Policy Center, they did a poll on that topic, and some of the results from their poll is that 49% of those working in person need some formal childcare because of COVID-19. About 1/3 of the parents who are working remotely are alternating work hours with someone else in their household to care for children. 21% of the parents who are still working in person are reducing their hours in order to take care of their children. Some parents, 10%, are working outside of normal business hours to care for their children. I know, Elizabeth, you are one of those 10%. Additional parents, about 8%, are taking paid and 11% are taking unpaid leave to provide childcare for their children. So it's a big impact. It's safe to assume that most of the burden, or most of the impact is on women, and it creates a big challenge for employers, because in many cases they cannot. They wish they could pay their workers even though they are not working full time, but in many cases they cannot do that, so they need to come up with other solutions.
Gad, I'm really glad that you started this conversation focusing on child care centers, because obviously schools don't technically go out of business, but many child care centers are private businesses. Some are independently owned, so small businesses that are suffering, and many of them are going out of business and taking away other options for parents in terms of childcare. And we know that childcare is one of the factors that's holding back the economic recovery, because if parents can't work, they can't engage, or they can't continue to contribute to the overall output of the economy. So it's really part of the whole conversation of how can we reboot the economy? How can we get to a path where there's sustainable growth going forward? So it's definitely relevant in terms of where we're trying to, in terms of the overall economic recovery. And Amy, the problems that we were highlighting at the top of the podcast, in terms of some of the challenges that working parents are really facing, and doing double duty as workers and homeschool teachers. What are some of the problems that working parents are facing, and what can they do about it?
Yeah, no, it's a really, as Gad highlighted, a big, big issue for many. And, we've already hinted at some of the top problems that I'm going to summarize. So, for example, we've already talked a little bit about schools opening, not opening. I can show you an article that I read recently of 7 different school districts in New Jersey, which is the state that I live in, where every school district is doing something different. Right? And it's hectic. It's crazy. How are parents supposed to manage this? And I know many parents, myself included, where we're still not sure what will happen for the beginning of the school year, and what's going to happen with the schedule. And so it's impossible to plan for childcare, for school care, for childcare, and then of course my work schedule, right? So lots of parents are in the same boat, whether schools are opening, not opening, hybrid, virtual, online, etc. The choices are frankly unlimited, and everyone, apparently every school is doing something a little bit differently. The other challenge that we've also hinted around at already is around the balancing homeschool and work at home at the same time, right? Many of the parents, if there is no school, or they are afraid to send their child to school, and you don't have anybody coming in, there's no help, you have no choice, right? You have to do your job and homeschool at the same time. Oh, and by the way, that includes being a short order cook, right? All the entire day, as I'm sure many parents understand. So this is, hugely disruptive to any work schedule, any school schedule, and family schedule, frankly. Um, and then finally, another big challenge, I think, for many is access at home, which is around the technology of what to do. There are many families where this is not a problem, but at the same time, there are actually, I think, perhaps more families where having the right access, having the right technology, whether it's the right laptop, the right Chromebooks, whether they have the right internet connection, right? If you've got one laptop with multiple children at home and a slower speed on your internet connection, how is anyone supposed to get any work done, right? Like it's not possible. And this spring, we saw a lot of that with a lot of families, struggling to keep that up. And so you could have, children that basically hardly learned anything over the spring semester, which, is terrible. It's a terrible outcome for the kids, for the families, and for long-term, health of our children and society, right? This is not a good thing. So, anyways, those are the, some of the really quick top challenges that I think parents are struggling with.
Right. And I think that this theme that you were talking about in terms of having access to devices, it just continues to drive home the point that this pandemic is having a disproportionate impact on certain demographic groups and certain households that have been less well off or are less well off or impacted more severely in terms of job losses and income losses, especially as certain government support starts to wane. Gad, do you have any reactions that you'd like to share?
Yeah, no, it is a big challenge for parents. I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of parents are not seriously looking for a job because they don't have a solution for. They became unemployed, but they don't have a solution for childcare, so they prefer to remain on unemployment benefits, which until now were very generous, rather than go back to the labor force. But that may not be a solution moving forward if the unemployment benefits are going to be much less generous.
Amy, how are companies reacting to all of this and the struggles that their workers are facing?
Yeah, no, it's I mean, the good news is that many companies are really expressing concern and genuine care of how do we help our folks and how do we help our employees. The challenge, I think, is that there aren't a lot of great answers that I can see. And I do have a couple of quick examples, but they're not scaled, right? Like it's not at every organization, it's maybe a few here and there. By and large, the most common benefit or support to parents that I hear from almost every organization is greater flexibility. So managers and leaders are providing greater flexibility to schedules on when and how parents get work done. And it might mean early mornings, it might mean late at night, but that everyone is considerate and compassionate and remaining flexible. So that, of course, is enormously beneficial to all workers, including parents. So that is by far the largest sort of help and support that most are offering. Then I have other examples where other organizations are doing different things. And again, these I would say are much smaller examples. So many of you in the news might have heard, Microsoft was offering 12 weeks of paid parental leave during the, crisis of the pandemic. And that's an enormously generous offer, but most organizations cannot afford something like that, right? And so you got to give credit to them. I've heard of other companies offering coaching, coaching help for leaders and parents in this crisis. How do they deal with it, and having somebody to sort of talk to and figure out ideas around that. Another, a little bit more common, is around subsidies. Again, only probably some of the largest organizations could probably offer some subsidies around childcare support to, different employees and different populations in their workforce. Some interesting new ideas that I've just recently talked to some companies about is there are companies that are now offering services to they're offering to companies in order to offer a service to the employees of that company, right? So the service is not directly accessible by individuals. You have to be going through a company that works with these other organizations and vendors. And so, for example, one is offering the ability to connect parents with what I call a child care coach. A child care coach is specifically there to help parents understand all the different complexities and options of what to do about childcare in this current crisis. What's a learning pod? How do I homeschool? How do I improve my learning virtual environment? How do I find a local nanny? How do we do a nanny share? How do we group together a local teacher that we could hire to, help us with some homeschooling? I mean, these are all different types of questions that parents around the country are asking. And there is a child care coach service, much like when you call the employee assistant program service, but it's specifically designed for child care. So that I think is an interesting example of what companies can offer to their employees. And then another example of a company, they will come in to your office sites for those that still use office sites or have employees that do need to go into the actual building, or they want companies want their employees to come back into their office buildings, right? So this organization, this vendor, will basically come in and assess some of your unused space. So, for example, you might have two large conference rooms that no one will use anymore, and they will basically come in, sanitize the entire space and basically make it a child care facility for your employees. And they can do this in, very rigorous protocols, especially around health and safety, but also do it fairly quickly. And then you're like, wow, that's really interesting, because historically, very few organizations offered, what we call on-site childcare support. And here they're doing it in a very creative and flexible manner, in a very agile manner. We'll take space that you already have, figure out what to do with it in a safe way, and then basically make it a child care support center. Oh, and they'll bring in, by the way, professionally trained teachers. They'll bring in, healthcare workers as necessary. I mean, it's all sort of provided and offered to the company to use. So, again, as a parent, I think I would find that, extraordinarily interesting if I had to go back into the office, or maybe I want to go back to the office. So those are just a couple of quick examples.
Right. I think that, one of the most important roles for companies is really to try to herd their employees, in a sense, those that have common problems, and to try to come up with solutions that they can scale up, like you mentioned, and try to really address as many of those challenges for as many employees as possible using those types of solutions that you mentioned.
Right. And I'm inspired to hear creativity and innovation, right? Because I think childcare in this work era that we live in is ripe for change and innovation. This pandemic, I think, has shown all of us that it was a system just on the verge of breaking. And then the minute we have an enormous crisis, the system is falling apart for childcare. Everything from the daycares to the school systems to, even the college university levels, right? The educational system is completely like fraying at the seams because of this pandemic, and ripe for change. How can we collectively think about and challenge ourselves and our communities to, provide quality childcare for families that need to and want to, that want to work, they want to, produce, they want to help our society, help our communities, help others, but we do have this need for, supportive and encouraging and quality childcare, of course. Yeah. Any last thoughts with either of you?
I just want to say it is many companies are kind of in a bind here, because on the one hand, because of the financial crisis that we are now going through, the economic crisis, many companies are in survival mode. And at the same time, they have to deal with parents who are in a survival mode, and in many cases, they don't have the ability to support the financial ability to support parents during this time and offer a lot of those solutions. So it is a difficult situation on both sides.
Yes, yes, definitely. Well, thank you. Why don't we stop here? This has been a great conversation with Gad Levanon and Elizabeth Crofoot about working parents working with kids. Thank you both for sharing your insights and your experiences with us at the audience. And thank you to all of you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to Insights. You can find this program and several others from the conference board on our website, and you can find them also on your favorite podcast app. Thanks again for listening. I'm Amy Abel with the Conference Board.
This has been Insights from the Conference Board.